Good morning, and welcome to the Universalist Church Online, in which love is the spirit. We're glad you're here, whether you're joining us from West Hartford, Connecticut, or anywhere in the world. I'm Gretchen, one of the co-moderators of the Universalist Church Board. If you're attending worship through our YouTube live stream, we invite you to connect with us more deeply. Visit our webpage, www.westhartforduu.org, to learn more. There, you can use the contact page to get onto our mailing list or let us know how you'd like to get involved. Our electronic communications are the best way for us to stay connected. We look forward to helping you become part of the Universalist Church, no matter where you live. Online worship can be wonderful, and technology sometimes fails us. Today, we're using our new AV system, so the service will look a little different than it did before. We think everything should work beautifully, but if it doesn't, we do appreciate your graciousness. Today's order of service will appear in the Zoom chat box and the YouTube description. Our Zoom fellowship time will begin shortly after worship ends. If you're attending through Zoom today, please stay online, even if you need to step away for a short break, to connect with one another. If you're attending through YouTube but are part of our Zoom community, you can sign into Zoom for fellowship after the service is over. Creating and strengthening our connections with one another is so important while we wait for the pandemic to end. And it will. There's light. These online fellowship times can help us stay connected. Now, please take a moment to turn off your email and your other apps, put the keyboard away, and settle in for worship.
If you happen to have a home chalice available, please light it while I light our congregation's chalice as well. And please join with me in speaking the words of our affirmation, our covenant. It's in the description and the chat. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
As this morning's service came together and we learned about Fanny Hensel, one thing that stuck out in her biography was her close relationship with her brother. It often featured healthy rivalry, like so many siblings, but more than that, it was characterized by trust and collaboration, elevating both their work. It reminded me of a story that's new to me and new to our library. It's called Ball Game, and it can be found in The Sea-Ringed World, Sacred Stories of the Americas, by Maria Garcia Esperon. It's one of many books we've added to our collection as we seek to update our library with more voices, stories, and histories. This particular tale is from the Maya K'iche tradition. One afternoon, the brothers Hanapu and Ishbalanque found the rubber balls left behind as a promise by their father Hun and uncle Vakub in the house of their grandmother, Ishmukane. When the twins saw those dusty spheres, their hearts roiled with joy and grief and rage, but above all, with a consuming yearning to play Pokelpock. They left the house to find their family's ball court almost devoured by the jungle. The twins cleared the field, carefully sweeping the floor and preparing to play. They had been passing the ball up and down the court for a few minutes when, in the underworld, the lords of Xibalba heard the stomping and thudding sounds over their heads. Almost immediately, they knew what was happening in the surface world. They were indignant. How dare these twins play ball where once their father and uncle disturbed our rest? Some demanded. We must summon them to play in Xibalba, others insisted. The lords of the underworld laughed, thinking of the traps they would set for the twins, luring them to death as they had done with Hun and Vakub. They sent the 4 messenger owls to summon the brothers. The winged heralds found Ishmukane alone, sweeping the house. The lords of Xibalba send us, said Arrow Owl. We're looking for your grandsons, Hanapu and Ishbalanque, one-legged owl explained. They have been summoned to play ball in Xibalba within 7 days, clarified Macaw Owl. In addition to a ball, they must bring their own gloves and leather hip pads, Skull Owl concluded. Old Ish McCain was devastated when she heard the news. As she had so many years ago, once again, she received a message of death from the underworld. When Hunahpu and Ishbalanque heard the news, they showed the same strength as their father and uncle and consoled their grandmother as best they could. The brothers began their journey to the underworld and crossed the rivers of water, blood, and pus that their father and uncle had once crossed. When the black road rose up, inviting them to travel along it, the twins smiled. They had devised a plan. They soon spotted the lords of Xibalba assembled together, waiting for the brothers in majestic poses. The brothers sent a mosquito ahead to test whether these were the true lords or wooden decoys. Well, the statues, because that is what they were, did not flinch at the bite of the mosquito. The lords of Xibalba, annoyed because their ruse had not worked, came out of hiding. The mosquito came and bit them one by one, causing them to screech with pain. Hunahpu and Ishbalanque laughed and laughed. Nursing their mosquito bites, the lords then invited the twins to sit on stone benches they had arranged for them. "Those are not benches," said Hunahpu. "No, they've been heated by fire," Ishbalanque agreed. "If our legs get burned, we couldn't play ball as you've commanded, majesties." The brothers laughed again as they stared into the perplexed faces of their hosts. Without any urging, they walked over to the House of Darkness, ready to spend the night before the game. The lords gave them a lit torch and lit cigars, commanding that they deliver them back intact the next morning. Once inside, the brothers immediately put out the flames. Instead, they attached the red tail of a macaw to the torch. At the ends of their cigars, they placed tiny fireflies that shone like stars. At dawn, the surprised lords of Xibalba received the torch and cigars intact. They had no choice but to recognize that the twins had passed all their trials. This time, there would be a game. The masters of the underworld would find it very hard to win. Please join in singing our Doxology.
We are grateful for all the ways in which you support us and one another. By offering your time, talent, and treasure to this community, you help us serve the members, friends, and wider world around this congregation. As part of that service, we share our general offering each week with organizations that are in harmony with our values, who do work in the world that brings us ever closer to creating the beloved community. Our offering today will be shared with Journey Home. Journey Home works in forming partnerships of local organizations, elected officials, businesses, and local communities in Greater Hartford to end barriers to housing, employment, social services, and health care for the homeless. They apply sustainable and innovative solutions to the barriers that create cycles of homelessness. They've spent more than a decade working to end chronic homelessness in the Greater Hartford region. You can find them online at journeyhomect.org. Please use the links in the chat, the description, and on our website to make your donation to our Sunday morning offering. You can donate through our Secure Breeze account as well. Thank you.
I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know this soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open. I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open. I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open.
As we begin our time of prayer and meditation today, I have a few things to share with you on behalf of the community. As you've heard, our practice now, while we're broadcasting in this way, is to mention people's first names and last initials. You can find more information in the Zoom chat, or if you need to find something out, please do reach out to me or Reverend Joy Christie via email. Judy B. has a fractured hip. She is in Hughes Health and Rehab Center. She'd love cards and text messages, but calls are a little bit too much for her to handle right now. It looks like she'll be in the rehab facility for at least a month, regaining her mobility. Please email me for her room number if you need it, but do know that she would love to hear from you through cards, letters, and texts. Nancy G. is having cataract surgery on March 9th. Please hold her in your thoughts and your love. Karen H.'s sister, Diane, is recovering from a time in hospital in New York. Also, Karen's nurse, Kim, who has helped Karen through many issues, is recovering from surgery. So please keep both of these important people in Karen's life in your thoughts and prayers. And now, please join me in a time of prayer and meditation. We pray with the words of the Reverend Susan McGinn, a Navy chaplain and a minister in our faith. Breathe with me. You who feel sorrows calling across the oceans or across the room, echoing in the spacious cavern of your own chest. Breathe with me. You who wake with the sun, carrying a restlessness to make justice and do mercy. Breathe with me. You who walk humbly, accepting that your gifts for the world will be made by you. You, a soft creature who must pause for meals, water, laughter, and rest. Breathe with me. You, who sing by heart songs of peace, joy, hope, and love, to make this world into a home. Breathe with me, and let us be in stillness and quiet together. with each breath that you take, that I take, that we take. May we inhale all things good, all the abundance of this world that is here for us, and with every exhalation, may we commit once again to making that available to those around us, those far from us. With every breath, let us find ourselves willing, able, joyfully recreating the world in the image that we know it should be, the beloved community, a community of love and justice, the world that our faith calls us to create, and that our love, our spirit, insists must be so. May it be so. Amen.
Abendlicht schon rauscht der Wald aus den tiefen Gründen. Droben weht der Herr nun bald an die Sterne zunden. Wie so stille, in den Schwinden, wie so stille in den Schwinden. Abendlicht nur rauscht der Wald aus den tiefen Gründen der Wald. Alles geht zu seiner Ruhe, wie die Welt verbrauset. Schauend hört der Wanderer zu, sehnt sich tief nach Hause. Sehnt sich tief nach Hause. Hier im Waldes grüne Krause,
Because this is the beginning of Women's History Month, our readings draw on women's histories and speak to the varied experiences women have had. Our first reading is The Heart of a Woman by Georgia Douglas Johnson, a poet and playwright of the Harlem Renaissance. The heart of a woman goes forth with the dawn, as a lone bird, soft winging so restlessly on. Afar over life's turrets and vales does it roam. In the wake of those echoes, the heart calls home. The heart of a woman falls back with the night and enters some alien cage in its plight and tries to forget it has dreamed of the stars while it breaks on the sheltering bars. Our second reading is by scholar and Unitarian foremother Margaret Fuller. The position I early was enabled to take was one of self-reliance. And were all women as sure of their wants as I was, the result would be the same. But they are so overloaded with precepts and guardians who think that nothing is so much to be dreaded for a woman as originality of thought or character, that their minds are impeded with doubts till they lose their chance of fair, free proportions. The difficulty is to get them to the point from which they shall naturally develop self-respect and learn self-help. The third reading is adapted from Unlegendary Heroes by Mary O'Donnell. Kathleen McKenna, Anagola, who was able to wash a week's sheets, shirts, and swaddling, break bread, and clean the house, all of a Monday. Bertie McMahon of Falkland walked to Monaghan for a sack of flour 2 days before her 8th child was born. Septa Dovey Glennon, very good at sewing, embroidered a set of vestments in 5 days. Mary Conlon, Tullyree, who wrote poems at night. Assumpta Meehan, Tony Garvey, saw many visions and was committed to an asylum. Mary Trainor, Donna, got no breakfasts, fed by the nuns, batch loaf with jam, the best speller in the school. Phyllis McCrudden, Nakafobel, who buried 2 husbands, reared 5 children, and farmed her own land. Anne Moffat of Enna, who taught people to read and did not charge.
Hörst du nicht die Bäume rauschen, draußen durch die Stille rund? Machst dich nicht hinauf zu lauschen, von den Söhnen in den Grund. Drückst dich nicht hinab zu lauschen, von den Söhnen in den Grund. Wo die wilden Bäche gehen, wunderbaren Morgenschein, und die stillen Böden sehen, in den Fluss von Hohenstein, in den Fluss von Hohenstein. Kennst du noch die lieben Lieder aus der alten stillen Zeit? Sie erwachen alle wieder nach Gottes Einsamkeit. Sie erwachen alle wieder nach Gottes Einsamkeit. Wenn die Bäume träumend lauschen und gefliegt durch der Schnee und die Fluss die Nixen rauschen, kommt herab, ist so kühl, kommt herab, ist so kühl, kommt herab, kommt herab, kommt herab, ist so kühl.
No doubt you've heard about Mendelssohn, the brilliant composer. Of course, I'm talking about Fanny Mendelssohn, the older sister and lifetime musical companion of the famous Felix Mendelssohn. Or more likely, you haven't heard of her. Throughout history, from medieval abbess Hildegard von Bingen in the 12th century and right up through the present, women have been composing worthy and wonderful music, yet they have often been ignored during their lifetimes or been erased thereafter. Why don't we hear more about them and from them Clearly, many of these composers were responsible for raising a family while pursuing their art. And through the ages, women were often discouraged from having a public persona. Their lives were supposed to be restricted to the home. Another obstacle was the lack of proper musical education. If they were lucky, musical girls were born into a musical family, as Fanny was, and grew up surrounded by performers and creators. Fanny Mendelssohn was born in 1805, more than 3 years before her brother Felix, and the two prodigies were inseparable throughout their childhoods. They learned composition together from the same teacher, shared their work with each other, and relied on each other's musical opinions. At the age of 13, Fanny performed the 24 preludes from Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier for her father's birthday, 2 solid hours of music, all from memory. She was renowned for showing at least as much promise as her brother. At one point, the man who taught both siblings musical composition favored Fanny over Felix. He wrote to the celebrated poet Goethe in 1816 in a letter introducing her father. He has adorable children, and his oldest daughter could give you something of Sebastian Bach. This child is really something special. Years later, in another letter to Goethe, the same teacher described Fanny's skill as a pianist with the highest praise for a woman at the time. She plays like a man. But when younger sibling Felix was sent off on a grand tour of Europe to hear and learn from other composers, Fanny stayed home. In 1822, when Fanny was 17 and Felix 13, she wrote, "Up to the present moment, I possess Felix's unbounded confidence. I have watched the progress of his talent step by step, and may say that I have contributed to his development. I have always been his only musical advisor, and he never writes down a thought before submitting it to my judgment." Soon, the older sister was getting ready to live a proper life, preferred by her father, as a good German wife to the painter Wilhelm Hensel. To his great credit, and in contrast to Fanny's father and brother, her future husband encouraged her musical passion. In fact, he said he wouldn't marry Fanny unless she continued to compose. Every morning, he would leave a piece of blank manuscript paper on her music stand in the hopes that she would fill it up by the end of the day. Fanny did continue writing and performing as much as was possible for a woman of her station. She organized impressive musical salons in her home in Berlin, where she played, conducted, and hosted many other highly regarded musicians. When little brother Felix reneged on a promise to write music for her wedding day, Fanny composed it herself the night before the ceremony. Felix Mendelssohn knew how talented Fanny was as a composer, and he may in fact have worried that she was better than he was. At one point, Felix published some of her songs under his own name, presumably to spare her the embarrassment of having a public career. In 1842, this resulted in an embarrassing moment when Queen Victoria, receiving Felix at Buckingham Palace, sang to the composer her favorite of his songs, Italienne. Felix relates in a letter, "Then I had to confess, I found it very hard, but pride goeth before a fall, that Fanny had written that song. And would the Queen now sing one of mine?" Despite gentle pleading in letters from Fanny, particularly after their father had died, Felix never gave her his blessing to publish. For decades, she composed pieces she would hear performed only in her own home. As to her brother Felix, he had this to say about his sister. "From my knowledge of Fanny, I should say that she has neither inclination nor vocation for authorship. She is too much all that a woman ought to be for this. She regulates her house and neither thinks of the public nor of the musical world, nor even of music at all, until her first duties are fulfilled. Publishing would only disturb her in these, and I cannot say that I approve of it. In 1846, Fanny was approached by 2 publishers about publishing her work. Felix at last gave a somewhat reluctant blessing, after which she published 6 opus numbers in quick succession, mainly consisting of songs and piano works. That same year, she composed and published her cheerful Gartenlieder, garden songs, for choir, 2 of which you'll hear today. Fanny wrote modestly to Felix, "There is a very pleasant time associated with these songs. That's why they are more dear to me than my other trifles." At last, at 41, she had cast off the shadow of the famous Felix. On May 14th, 1847, a positive review of her Gartenlieder was printed in the prestigious Zeitschrift für Neue Musik. But Fanny had run out of time. That very evening, she suffered a stroke while rehearsing one of her brother's choral works and died. In the next 6 months, before himself dying suddenly at 38, Felix attempted to ensure that his sister received the recognition she deserved by collecting many of her compositions for publication. We'll never know if he carried a burden of guilt over having discouraged her from sharing her talents. Only a small fraction of Fanny's hundreds of compositions have ever been published or performed. In 1829, she mentioned that she had written an Easter sonata. This sonata, along with most of her music, was forgotten. A sonata is a solo piano piece, and not many composers of the time tried their hand at one for nearly a decade after Beethoven left the scene. That a young woman of only 22 dared to write a piano sonata less than a year after Ludwig van Beethoven, the acknowledged master of the form, died was pretty astonishing. But Fanny Mendelssohn was bold. Naturally, her sonata wasn't published, existing only in a private bound volume. Most of that volume lay unnoticed for years in the Berlin archives which house Fanny's papers, missing a crucial 30 pages. Nearly 150 years later, a musical collector unearthed a manuscript in a Paris bookshop in 1970. He believed it to be an unknown work by the famous Felix Mendelssohn, and since it was signed F. Mendelssohn, why wouldn't he? He bought it and had it recorded as the fantastic and freshly discovered Easter Sonata by Felix. 40 years after that, in 2010, American musicologist Angela Mace Christian heard the Easter Sonata and thought she recognized Fanny's unique musical touch. She tracked the collector down and persuaded him to show her the manuscript. He was convinced that it was composed by Felix and had only been copied out by Fanny. "It can't be by Fanny," he insisted. "It's a masterpiece, very masculine, very violent." But the young musicologist saw that it was full of crossed-out notes and annotations, and thus could not be a copy, which would have been redone until note perfect. She also realized that the pages were numbered, and those numbers were precisely the ones missing from the incomplete volume of Fanny's work in Berlin. Finally, nearly 2 centuries after being composed, the Easter Sonata was performed in 2012 as a stunning, newly revealed piece by Fanny Mendelssohn. How could we have lost the history and the music of such an accomplished composer? Here's part of a letter her father sent Fanny when she was 14, where he compared her future to that of her 11-year-old brother Felix. "Music will perhaps become his profession, whilst for you it can and must be merely an ornament, never the underpinning of your life and work. Felix has real ambition, a desire to assert himself in an effort that seems very important to him, whereas it is no less honorable that you have always been good-natured and reasonable in these situations, and by your joy in the applause that your brother acquired, proved that you might, in his position, have merited equal approval. Persevere in this conviction and behavior. They are feminine, and only the feminine adorns women. Despite the fact that Fanny Mendelssohn had to struggle all her life against forces that would suppress her musical brilliance and attempt to stifle her urge to compose, she persisted. In fact, according to pianist Andrea Lamb, who premiered Fanny's Easter Sonata under the name of the true composer, we know that she didn't have the same kind of education in music as Felix did. And you see that she's unhindered by all of these traditions and expectations. And so she's really experimenting very freely, which is really interesting and sometimes difficult to interpret because it's so different. But it's really very exciting. Those of us who sang the Garden Leader choral pieces by Fanny for this service noticed the same things. Her harmonies are sometimes unusual and a little bit unexpected, which is pretty cool. It's nice, at last, to hear the other Mendelssohn's musical voice, isn't it?
How wonderful to have an opportunity to hear music that has been underappreciated from a woman who had so much to give. With this spirit of appreciating what is possible now and might not have been possible in the past, let us speak together our unison benediction, knowing that we can make this world one in which we are all able to fully be present and fulfill who we can and should be. Engage with the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.